Captain Lee Tiemann was drinking his morning coffee when the alarm bells started ringing across the exploration ship. Sejong, the sound made everyone on the bridge jump up from their seats because they had been traveling through empty space for 3 weeks without seeing anything interesting. The ship was on a routine mission to map new star systems, near the edge of human territory, but now something was happening that nobody expected, Commander. Park Ji-yeon ran to her station and started checking all the sensors while her fingers moved quickly over the control panel. She had been working on spaceships for 15 years and had never seen readings like these before. The computer was detecting some kind of transmission coming from a star system that was supposed to be empty according to all their maps. The transmission was weak and full of static, but it was definitely artificial, which meant someone or something was trying to communicate. The signal was coming from the Kepler system, which was about 2 light years away from their current position. Captain Lee ordered the ship to change course immediately because any sign of alien life was something humans needed to investigate. Dr. Kim So-min was the ship's expert on alien biology, even though she had never actually met any aliens before. Humans had been exploring space for 50 years but had only found empty planets and dead civilizations until now. She rushed to the communications room to help decode whatever message was coming through the static. It took 6 hours of hard work, but finally they managed to clean up the signal enough to see what was sending it. The main screen flickered and then showed the face of something that was definitely not human. The creature had silver skin that seemed to glow with its own light and 3 large eyes that looked tired and scared. Its head was shaped differently from humans, but the expression of fear was something anyone could understand. The being started speaking in a language that sounded like music mixed with clicking sounds, but the ship's computer had been programmed to learn new languages quickly. Within minutes, the universal translator started working and words began appearing on the screen below the alien's face. "My name is Velter, and I speak for the Luminari people," the alien said while its 3 eyes looked directly into the camera. "We are sending this message to anyone who can hear us because we are running out of time. Our worlds are dying, and our people are disappearing one by one." Captain Lee felt a chill run down his spine as he listened to the translation. The alien called Velter continued talking, and his voice sounded desperate, like someone who had been awake for days without sleep. "We have lived in peace for thousands of years across 7 beautiful worlds in this system," the alien continued. "Our cities were full of light and music, and our children played in gardens that stretched beyond the horizon, but then they came, and everything changed." Dr. Kim was recording everything while trying to understand what kind of creature she was looking at. The Luminari seemed to be made of living light that had somehow taken solid form. Their technology was clearly advanced because they had managed to send this message across interstellar space. "The things that attack us call themselves devourers, and they are unlike anything we have ever seen," Velter said while his silver skin flickered with patterns of blue and green light. "They do not just kill us, they take everything we are, our memories, our thoughts, our very souls become part of them, and when they are done, nothing remains but empty shells." Commander Park was taking notes about everything the alien was saying because this information would be important for the people back on Earth. The idea of creatures that could steal thoughts and memories sounded like something from a horror movie, but the fear in Velter's eyes was very real. "We tried to fight them with our weapons, but they learned how to use our own technology against us," Velter continued. "We tried to hide on distant moons, but they found us anyway. We even tried to talk to them to understand what they wanted, but they only know how to consume and destroy." The alien paused for a moment and looked away from the camera as if he was remembering something terrible. When he looked back, his 3 eyes were filled with tears that glowed like liquid. "Starlight, 4 of our 7 worlds are gone completely," the alien said quietly. "Billions of our people have been taken, and we can feel their minds crying out from inside the Devourer Collective. They are still alive, but trapped forever in a nightmare they cannot escape." Captain Lee realized that this was not just a distress call, it was a plea for help from a dying civilization. The Luminari were facing complete extinction, and they were asking strangers for help because they had nowhere else to turn. "We detected your radio signals many years ago and learned about your species," the alien continued. "You call yourselves humans, and from what we could understand, you are warriors who fight to protect others. We know you are new to space travel, and your technology is not as advanced as ours, but You have something we have lost. Dr. Kim leaned forward to hear better because she was curious about what the alien thought humans had that his advanced civilization did not. You have the will to fight even when victory seems impossible, Velter said. With something that might have been hope in his voice, our people forgot how to be warriors because we lived in peace for so long. But you humans seem to understand that sometimes violence is necessary to protect the innocent, the message continued. With detailed information about the Devourer attacks and the location of the remaining Luminari worlds, Velter explained that the 3 surviving planets were under siege and would probably fall within days unless someone helped them. The coordinates appeared on the screen along with technical data about the enemy. We are sending you everything we know about the Devourers in the hope that you can find a way to stop them, Velter said as his image began to flicker because the transmission was getting weaker. We do not expect you to save us because we know the odds are against anyone who fights these creatures. But if you can warn other civilizations about this threat, then maybe our deaths will have some meaning. The transmission ended. Abruptly leaving the bridge of the Sejong in complete silence, Captain Lee looked around at his crew and saw the same expression on every face. They were all thinking about billions of innocent people who were about to die unless someone did something. To help them, Commander Park was already calculating how long it would take to get back to human space and alert the military. The Kepler system was far from Earth, but not impossibly far if they used the fastest ships available. Dr. Kim was studying the biological data the Luminari had transmitted and making notes about possible ways to fight creatures that could absorb consciousness. Captain Lee made the decision that would change everything. He ordered the communications officer to send an emergency message back to Earth with all the information they had received. The message would take weeks to arrive, but every hour counted when entire civilizations were at stake. As the Sejong changed course toward home, Captain Lee looked out at the stars and wondered if humanity was really ready for this kind of responsibility. They had been exploring space for only 50 years and had never fought anything more dangerous than space pirates, but the Luminari had asked for help, and there was something in human nature that could not ignore a cry for help. The crew worked through the night to analyze everything. Velter had told them the Devourers were clearly the most dangerous enemy anyone had ever faced, but humans had survived worse odds before. They had fought world wars and survived natural disasters and always found ways to adapt and overcome. Dr. Kim discovered something interesting in the biological data the Luminari had sent. The Devourers were not just killing people, they were storing their consciousness in some kind of collective memory, which meant the victims might still be saved if someone could find a way to free them. This changed everything because it meant rescue might still be possible. By morning, the crew of the Sejong had made their decision. They would do everything possible to help the Luminari, even if it meant fighting an enemy that had already destroyed 4 advanced civilizations. The message was already on its way to Earth, and soon humanity would have to decide whether they were ready to go to war to save complete strangers. Captain Lee knew that this moment would be remembered as the day humanity stopped being just another species exploring the galaxy and became something more. They were about to become the protectors of those who could not protect themselves, and nothing would ever be the same again. Admiral Choi Daeho was eating breakfast with his family when the emergency call came through on his personal communicator. The message from Captain Lee Taiman's ship had just arrived at Earth after traveling through space for 3 weeks, and now every military leader on the planet was being called to an immediate meeting. The war room aboard the flagship Hangul had never seen so many important people gathered at the same time. Generals, admirals, and political leaders from every nation on Earth filled the massive chamber, while holographic displays showed maps of the Kepler system where the Luminari were fighting for their lives. President Kang Min-jae stood at the center of the room looking tired because he had been awake all night, reading reports about the alien threat. The Devourers were unlike anything humanity had ever imagined, and the idea of creatures that could steal people's minds made everyone in the room uncomfortable. General Nang Yunji was the first person to speak after the president finished explaining the situation. She had been a soldier for 30 years and had fought in conflicts all over Earth, but nothing had prepared her for news like this. The Luminari were dying while humans sat in meetings and talked about what to do. Cannot waste time with endless discussions while innocent people are being murdered, General Nam said. while pointing at the holographic map. Every day we wait means millions more deaths and fewer survivors to rescue. If we do decide to help them, Fleet Commander Yun Minsu disagreed with the general because he thought rushing into battle against an unknown enemy was dangerous. The Devourers had already destroyed 4 advanced civilizations, and they seemed to learn and adapt quickly to new threats. Human weapons might not work against creatures that could absorb technology. We need more information about what we are fighting, Commander Yun argued. While studying the technical data the Luminari had sent, the Devourers can take over minds and use captured technology against us. If we attack without understanding them, we might just be giving them more weapons to use. Dr. On Haijin was the government's top expert on alien biology. Even though she had only studied theoretical creatures until now, she had spent 3 days analyzing every piece of information Velter had transmitted, and her conclusions were frightening. The Devourers were not just dangerous, they were perfect predators. These entities exist in a state between living tissue and digital information, Dr. On explained while showing microscopic images on the main screen. They can transfer their consciousness between different host bodies at will, and they reproduce by consuming other intelligent minds. The room fell quiet as everyone tried to understand what the scientist was saying. The Devourers were not like any enemy humans had ever fought. They could not be killed in traditional ways, because they were not truly alive in the first place, and they became stronger every time they consumed another victim. Minister Lee Sung-hoon was responsible for the government's budget, and he was worried about the cost of mounting a military operation so far from Earth. The Kepler system was at the edge of human exploration range, and sending a large fleet there would require resources from every nation on the planet. We are talking about committing our entire military to help strangers we have never met, Minister Lee said while reviewing financial reports. A mission like this could bankrupt half the countries on Earth, and we have no guarantee of success. General Nam stood up quickly because she was angry at the minister's attitude toward the crisis. The Luminari had asked for help because they were facing extinction, and all the minister could think about was money. The general had seen too much war to let innocent people die over budget concerns. The cost of helping them is nothing compared to the cost of ignoring them. General Nam replied with fire in her voice, if we let the Devourers finish destroying the Luminari, they will move on to find new victims. Eventually they will discover Earth, and then we will face them alone. Admiral Choi had been listening to the arguments while studying tactical reports about human military capabilities. The fleet was strong, but had never been tested against an enemy like the Devourers. Most human weapons were designed for fighting other humans or destroying physical targets, not creatures made of living energy. President Kang raised his hand to stop the arguing because he had made his decision. The room became completely silent as everyone waited to hear what the leader of Earth would say about humanity's first contact with alien civilization. The weight of history was pressing down on all of them. The Luminari came to us for help because they believe we are warriors who protect the innocent, President Kang said slowly while looking around the room at every face. We have a choice to make today. We can prove them right, or we can prove that humans only care about themselves. The president walked over to the holographic display, showing the Kepler system where 3 Luminari worlds were still fighting against the Devourer invasion. Red warning lights blinked on the map, indicating areas where the enemy was attacking and winning. The situation was getting worse every minute. I am ordering full military mobilization, President Kang announced while his voice echoed through the chamber. Every nation will contribute ships, weapons, and soldiers to this mission. We are not going to the Kepler system to negotiate or to study the enemy. We are going there to destroy them completely. The room exploded into activity as military officers began making plans for the largest fleet deployment in human history. Communication specialists started sending messages to military bases around the world, while logistics experts calculated how much food, fuel, and ammunition would be needed for a campaign in deep space. General Nam was already selecting which ground forces would be included in the mission. She wanted soldiers who had experience fighting in difficult conditions because battling creatures that could control minds would test human limits in ways no previous war had ever done. Fleet Commander Yoon began organizing the Space Navy for departure, even though he still had concerns about fighting an unknown Enemy. The human fleet included ships from a dozen different nations, all built with different technologies and fighting styles, but somehow they would have to work together. Dr. was assigned to develop new weapons that might be effective against the Devourers. Traditional guns and missiles were designed to destroy physical targets, but these enemies were made of energy and consciousness. She would need to think of completely new approaches to warfare. Within 72 hours, the largest military force in human history was assembled in orbit around Earth. 200 warships supported by 500 smaller vessels, carrying weapon supplies and 1 million soldiers from every country on the planet. The sight was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. Admiral Choi stood on the bridge of the flagship Hangul and looked out at the assembled fleet. Through the viewports he could see ships stretching away in every direction like a city floating in space. Never before had humanity united for a single purpose like this. The final message came from President Kang, who spoke to every person in the fleet over the communication system. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of an entire species' determination to do what was right no matter the cost. We go not as conquerors but as liberators, the president said while his voice reached every ship in the fleet. The Luminari asked for our help, and we will give it to them even if it costs us everything. Show the galaxy what humans do when innocent people cry out for protection. The fleet began moving toward the Kepler system, while Earth grew smaller behind them. It would take weeks to reach the battlefield, but when they arrived, the Devourers would learn something they had never experienced in millions of years of easy victories. They were about to face an enemy that refused to accept defeat. Commander Song Ji-yoon led 12 reconnaissance ships toward the 5th Luminari world, expecting to find a battle raging between the aliens and their mysterious attackers. Instead, her sensors detected nothing but silence from a planet that should have been home to billions of living beings. The approaching ships could see that the planet's surface was covered with cities that still had lights glowing in their windows, but there were no radio transmissions, no spacecraft moving in orbit, and no signs of life anywhere. Despite looking normal from space, something was terribly wrong. Lieutenant Colonel Bae Won-ho commanded the first landing party to set foot on Luminari soil. His soldiers wore heavy combat armor and carried weapons designed specifically for fighting the Devourers, but nothing could have prepared them for what they found in the empty cities. The streets were clean and undamaged, with vehicles parked neatly along the sidewalks as if their owners had just stepped away. For a few minutes, shops and restaurants looked ready to serve customers, but every building was completely empty, without even bodies to show what had happened to the people. Private Kamare was checking one of the schools when she found something that made her stomach turn. The classroom was arranged as if lessons had been in progress, with books open on desks and writing still visible on the blackboard, but 30 young desks sat empty as if their occupants had simply vanished. The landing party moved carefully through the silent city while their officers tried to understand what kind of enemy could make an entire civilization disappear without destroying anything. The Devourers had not come as conquerors who wanted to claim territory. They had come as something much worse. Sergeant Major Oh Sung-jin was leading a squad through what appeared to be a hospital when they encountered their first Devourer. The creature was using the body of a Luminari doctor, but something about its movements was wrong, like a puppet being controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. The entity turned toward the human soldiers and smiled with an expression that did not match the fear that should have been in its stolen eyes when it spoke. The voice was not one person talking, but dozens of different voices layered together, creating a sound that made everyone feel sick. How interesting, the creature said while tilting its head in a way that looked unnatural. You are the humans we have heard so much about from the memories of the Luminari, such a young species, but already so eager to fight battles that are not your own. Sergeant Oh raised his weapon but hesitated because the creature was wearing the face of an innocent person, even though he knew the real doctor was probably dead or trapped inside the monster. It was difficult to shoot something that looked like a victim. The Devourer seemed to understand his hesitation and laughed with sounds that came from too many throats at once. It had absorbed the minds of billions of beings over millions of years, and human emotions were just another interesting pattern to study and exploit. Your species fascinates us, the entity continued while walking closer to the soldiers. Most civilizations try to hide or run when they learn about us, but humans received a call for help from strangers and immediately declared war. Against a superior enemy. Captain Lim Taeyong was monitoring the situation from his ship in orbit and could see through the cameras mounted on his soldier's armor. The Devourer was clearly testing the humans, trying to understand what made them different from all the other species it had consumed. Over the centuries, we have absorbed the memories of over 1,000 civilizations, the creature said while its stolen eyes glowed with unnatural light. Each species taught us something new about fear, survival, and the futile hope that someone might save them, but none of them ever sent warriors to fight for others. The entity raised one hand, and immediately every electronic device carried by the soldiers began malfunctioning. Weapons, computers, and communication equipment all shut down at the same time, leaving the landing party isolated and defenseless against an enemy that could control technology with a thought. Your weapons are clever, the Devourer said while examining a rifle that had fallen from a soldier's hands. We have seen similar designs in the memories of species that tried to fight us long ago. But metal and energy cannot harm beings who exist between the physical and digital realms. Sergeant O realized that everything the Luminari had told them was true. The Devourers were not just dangerous, they were seemingly invincible against conventional warfare. They could control technology, absorb knowledge, and transfer between bodies at will, making them nearly impossible to kill. The creature offered the humans a choice that it had probably given to every species it had ever encountered. They could withdraw from the system and be ignored for now, or they could stay and face the same fate as the Luminari and all the others who had tried to resist. But Sergeant O had not come to the Kepler system to negotiate with monsters. He looked directly into the creature's glowing eyes and delivered humanity's answer in words that would become famous throughout the galaxy. When the story was told to future generations, we did not come here to talk with you, we came here to destroy you, he said while pulling out a backup weapon that used completely different technology. The Devourer had disabled their main equipment. But humans always carried more than one way to fight. The creature seemed surprised that a human soldier would refuse its offer and threaten it even after seeing a demonstration of Devourer power. Most species became terrified and helpless when they realized how outmatched they were, but humans appeared to get more determined when facing impossible odds. Your bravery is admirable, but ultimately pointless, the entity replied while more Devourers began emerging from buildings throughout the city. We have consumed civilizations that were far more advanced than yours, and we will add your memories to our collection just like all the others. The battle for the fifth Luminari world began when Sergeant O fired his backup weapon at the creature. The projectile was designed to disrupt energy patterns, and when it hit the Devourer, the stolen body collapsed as the entity was forced to abandon its host. More human soldiers landed throughout the city as the reconnaissance mission became a full-scale invasion. The war against the Devourers had officially started, and both sides were about to learn that this conflict would be unlike anything either had experienced before. Captain Lim watched from orbit as his soldiers engaged creatures that could turn their own technology against them. The humans were fighting with primitive backup weapons and hand-to-hand combat, but they refused to retreat even when facing an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. The first day of fighting established the pattern that would define the entire war. Humans could not match Devourer technology or energy powers, but they had something their enemy had never encountered before: the absolute refusal to give up no matter how bad the situation became. Admiral Park Ji-won stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought Dokdo and watched as 300 human warships dropped out of hyperspace around the sixth Luminari world. The largest fleet in human history had arrived to face an enemy that had been terrorizing the galaxy for millions of years. The assembled armada represented the combined military power of every nation on Earth. Ships from Korea, America, Russia, China, Europe, and dozens of other countries flew together under a single command for the first time in human history, united by the desperate need to save innocent aliens from extinction. General Ko Minju had spent weeks developing new tactics specifically designed to fight creatures that could absorb technology and consciousness. Traditional military strategies were useless against an enemy that could turn captured weapons against their former owners. Within minutes of touching them, every human soldier now carried 3 different types of weapons based on Completely unrelated scientific principles. If the devourers learned to counter one approach, the fighters could immediately switch to something totally different, making it much harder for the enemy to adapt their defenses. The attack began with something the devourers had never seen before in millions of years of conquest. Human forces struck from 17 different directions at exactly the same time, using tactics that seemed to have no connection to each other. This was warfare. As Controlled Chaos Strike Group Alpha attacked from above using kinetic bombardment weapons that relied on simple physics rather than advanced technology. Strike Group Beta approached from the side with quantum disruptors that targeted energy patterns, while Strike Group Gamma moved in from below with biological weapons. Major Chun Do-yun led a team of engineers who had converted mining equipment into weapons of war. Their modified boring machines could create holes in reality itself, allowing them to attack Devourer energy matrices directly instead of trying to damage physical host bodies. The Devourers tried to respond to the human assault, but found themselves confused by tactics that made no logical sense. Every time they adapted to counter one type of attack, the humans would switch to a completely different approach that required learning new defenses from scratch. Colonel Park Suk-ying commanded atmospheric fighters that dove through the planet's air using weapons based on ancient human technologies. Crossbows, flamethrowers, and even trained attack animals were proving effective against enemies who had learned to counter advanced technology but had never faced primitive warfare. Dr. Lee Subin made the breakthrough that changed everything. While analyzing fragments of destroyed devourers, her research revealed that the entities were not actually consuming consciousness. They were copying and storing it while destroying the original bodies. This meant rescue was still possible. The revelation that devourer victims were still alive as trapped prisoners inside the collective memory changed human tactics from destruction to liberation. Instead of just trying to kill their enemies, the soldiers began using modified medical equipment to extract stolen minds. Captain Shin Jawan led the engineering corps that built the first consciousness liberation arrays. These devices combined medical scanners with quantum computers to create machines that could pull trapped minds out of devourer collectives without destroying the stored personalities. The first successful extraction happened during a battle in the ruins of a Luminary hospital. Commander Huang extracted the consciousness of a trapped doctor and transferred it into a specially prepared synthetic body. The liberated Luminary opened his eyes and spoke his own name instead of echoing absorbed voices. News of the successful rescue spread through the human fleet like wildfire, and suddenly every soldier understood that they were not just fighting to stop the devourers, they were fighting to save everyone the creatures had ever taken. This was no longer war, it was the largest rescue mission in galactic history. Major Kim Yunho developed mobile liberation units that could be carried into battle by individual soldiers. The portable devices allowed ground troops to free trapped minds during combat operations instead of waiting for large-scale medical facilities to be established. The devourers began making strategic errors as they faced tactics they could not understand or predict. Their overconfidence, built on millions of years of easy victories, became a weakness when fighting humans who refused to follow conventional military logic. Admiral Park coordinated simultaneous strikes on all three remaining Luminary worlds, while liberation teams worked around the clock to rescue as many trapped minds as possible. The human fleet was taking heavy casualties, but every freed consciousness made the sacrifice worthwhile. Dr. Moon Siwon discovered that the devourers were not naturally occurring creatures, but artificial weapons created by an ancient civilization as the ultimate deterrent against aggressive species. Something had gone wrong in their programming, and they had turned on their creators before spreading across the galaxy the revelation that the devourers were broken weapons rather than natural predators gave human scientists hope that there might be a way to shut them down permanently. Somewhere in the absorbed memories of the collective was the original programming, including possibly a deactivation code. Captain Yu Jongmin volunteered to attempt direct neural interface with a devourer collective to search for the shutdown sequence. The mission was essentially suicide because anyone who connected their mind to the enemy network would likely be absorbed and lost forever. General Nam Yunji approved the desperate plan because conventional warfare was not winning fast enough to save the remaining Luminari populations. Every day of fighting meant more victims were taken and fewer could be rescued even if humanity eventually won the war. The quantum shielding and neural enhancement technology needed to protect Captain Yu during his mission represented the most advanced equipment humans had ever built. Multiple layers of protection would hopefully keep his consciousness intact long enough to find and transmit the deactivation code. As the largest battle in human history raged across 3 star systems, Captain Yu prepared for a mission that would either save billions of trapped minds or add his own consciousness to the collective he was trying to destroy. The fate of countless civilizations depended on one man's ability to survive inside the enemy network. Admiral Park watched the tactical displays showing human forces engaged in desperate combat on dozens of worlds while medical teams worked frantically to extract as many trapped minds as possible. The price of victory was measured not just in human casualties, but in the lives they failed to save. The war against the Devourers had become something unprecedented in galactic history, an entire species fighting not for territory or resources, but for the freedom of strangers they had never met. Humanity was proving that some things were worth any sacrifice. Fleet Admiral Huang Sunmi coordinated the most complex military operation in human history as Liberation. Fleets struck simultaneously at the 4th, 5th, and 6th Luminari worlds. The scale of the assault required precise timing across multiple star systems while medical teams worked to save millions of trapped minds. Colonel No Kansu led the ground forces that achieved the first major breakthrough in freeing large numbers of Luminari civilians from Devourer collectives. The process was dangerous and painful because trapped consciousness had to be carefully extracted while the host collective was systematically destroyed. The liberation procedure required teams of doctors, engineers, and soldiers working together in ways that had never been attempted before. Medical scanners located trapped minds within the energy matrix, while quantum computers created extraction pathways and weapons. Specialists destroyed the surrounding collective structure. When the first group of freed Luminari opened their eyes and spoke their own names, instead of echoing the voices of their captors, every human soldier in the area felt a surge of determination that made all their sacrifices worthwhile. They were not just winning battles. They were bringing people back from the dead. Dr. on Minji developed improved techniques that allowed liberation teams to rescue dozens of trapped minds simultaneously instead of extracting them one at a time. The new methods reduced the risk to human medical personnel while dramatically increasing the number of people who could be saved. The Devourers attempted to negotiate when they realized that humanity was not trying to defeat them but to completely eliminate them from existence. They offered to share the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 conquered civilizations, promising humans power and technology beyond imagination. President Kang Minjae responded to the Devourer offer with a message broadcast on all military frequencies. That became one of the most famous speeches in human history. We did not come here for your knowledge or your power. We came here for our friends, and we will not leave without them. The rejection of the Devourer offer surprised entities that had existed for millions of years. Most species they encountered were interested in gaining advantage over their enemies, but humans seemed to care more about rescuing strangers than acquiring advanced technology. Lieutenant Commander SEO Jinha made a disturbing discovery while analyzing the memories extracted from liberated Devourer fragments. The entities had not been consuming random civilizations but had been systematically targeting species that showed potential for becoming galactic protectors. The pattern suggested that the Devourers were not just predators but were actively working to prevent the rise of civilizations that might threaten their dominance. They had identified and destroyed dozens of species that showed signs of developing the same protective instincts that humans displayed. Dr. Moon Siwon made the breakthrough that revealed the true nature of their enemy while studying the deepest layers of Devourer collective memory. The entities were weapons created by a species called the Architects, who had wanted to create the ultimate deterrent against aggression. The Architects had designed the Devourers to target aggressive civilizations and absorb their knowledge to prevent future conflicts, but something had gone wrong in the programming, and the Weapons had decided that all intelligent life was potentially aggressive and needed to be consumed. The shutdown code was hidden in the original architect programming, buried beneath millions of years of absorbed memories and experiences. Finding it would require someone to dive deeper into the collective consciousness than anyone had ever attempted while remaining coherent enough to transmit the information. Captain Yu Zhongmin prepared for the neural interface mission that would either save countless civilizations or cost him his mind. The experimental equipment designed to protect his consciousness during the connection had never been tested, and might not work when exposed to the full power of a devourer. Collective General Kim Tae-yun commanded the diversionary attacks that would hopefully distract the devourers while Captain Yu attempted his infiltration mission. The human forces launched their most intense assault yet across all three remaining luminary worlds to draw enemy attention away from the infiltration attempt. The neural connection was established during the height of battle while explosions lit up the sky around the medical facility where Captain Yu lay. Connected to machines that monitored his brain activity, his consciousness dove into the collective network while his body remained motionless on the examination table. Admiral Huang watched the neural readouts while Captain Yu fought his way through layers of absorbed minds searching for the original programming. The deeper he went, the more dangerous it became as billions of trapped consciousness pressed against his mental defenses. The devourers became aware of the intrusion and began trying to absorb Captain Yu's mind like they had done to so many others. But human determination proved stronger than they expected, and he continued searching even as his neural patterns became increasingly unstable. Captain Yu's vital signs flatlined, just as his neural interface transmitted a complex data sequence that contained the shutdown code hidden in the deepest layers of devourer collective memory. His sacrifice had given humanity the key to ending the threat forever. The shutdown signal was immediately broadcast to all human ships and transmitted across 7 star systems, reaching every devourer entity simultaneously. The ancient programming activated and began the process that would free billions of trapped minds across the battlefield. Devourers suddenly stopped moving as their energy matrices began to collapse. But instead of dying, they began releasing the consciousness they had stored. The liberation was not just of recent victims, but of every mind they had ever absorbed over millions of years. The sight of billions of trapped beings suddenly returning to awareness was overwhelming for human forces who had been fighting to save thousands. The scope of devourer crimes against intelligent life was far greater than anyone had imagined, but now justice was finally being served. Fleet Admiral Huang coordinated the massive humanitarian effort required to help displaced beings who had been prisoners for centuries or millennia. The logistics of caring for survivors from civilizations that had been thought extinct for geological ages challenged every human resource. The war was over, but the work of liberation had just begun. Humanity had proven that some fights were worth any cost and that protecting the innocent was more important than any other consideration. The galaxy would remember what humans had done when strangers asked for help. Admiral Song Minking watched the final moments of Captain Yu Zhongmin's neural infiltration from the medical bay of the command ship. Baekye, the brave officer, had volunteered for a suicide mission to find the Devourer shutdown code, and now his sacrifice was about to determine the fate of countless civilizations. The neural interface readings showed Captain Yu's consciousness diving deeper into the collective memory while fighting against absorption attempts that would trap his mind forever. His brain patterns became increasingly erratic as he searched through millions of years of accumulated knowledge looking for the original programming. Medical officers monitored his vital signs, while engineers prepared to broadcast whatever information he managed to transmit before his mind was overwhelmed. The entire human fleet waited in tense silence as one man carried the hopes of every trapped soul in the galaxy. Captain Yu's heart stopped beating just as the neural interface registered a successful data transmission. The shutdown code had been found and transmitted in the final seconds before his consciousness was lost to the collective. He had been trying to destroy. The ancient deactivation sequence was immediately broadcast to every human ship and transmitted across all 7 star systems of the Kepler region, reaching every devourer entity simultaneously. Regardless of their location or current activity across the battlefields, human soldiers watched in amazement as devourer entities suddenly froze in place as if time itself had stopped. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years were finally experiencing the shutdown command their creators had built into their original programming. Instead of simply dying, the devourers began releasing every consciousness they had ever stored. The energy matrices that held billions of trapped minds started dissolving in controlled sequences that allowed the absorbed personalities to escape without being damaged. Lieutenant Park Hyun-woo was among the first humans to witness the mass liberation as beings from dozens of different species suddenly materialized around his position. People who had been thought dead for centuries opened their eyes and looked around in confusion at a world they no longer recognized. The scope of the liberation was beyond anything humans had imagined. The devourers had not just consumed the Luminari and a few other recent civilizations, they had been systematically absorbing intelligent life for geological ages, storing the minds of entire species that had been extinct since before Earth formed. General Kwon Young-ho found himself commanding the largest humanitarian operation in Galactic history as billions of displaced beings suddenly needed food, shelter, medical care, and transportation to worlds that might no longer exist. The logistics were overwhelming, but human organizational skills proved equal to the challenge. Species that existed only in ancient legends were suddenly asking for help getting home to star systems that had been empty for millions of years. The humans who had come to save the Luminari found themselves responsible for refugees from civilizations they had never heard of. Dr. Kim Ji-soo led medical teams that worked around the clock to help liberated beings adjust to physical existence after spending centuries or millennia as pure consciousness. Many of the freed minds had difficulty remembering how to control bodies and needed extensive rehabilitation. Commander Lee Dongmin coordinated refugee processing centers on 17 different worlds as humanity scrambled to provide basic necessities for populations that dwarfed the entire human species. The rescued beings came from every conceivable type of civilization and environment. The Luminari were among the most recent victims, but they helped translate for older species whose languages had been forgotten for ages. Some of the liberated beings had been prisoners since before the first human civilizations developed agriculture, making communication extremely challenging. President Kang Min-jae addressed the rescued populations in a speech broadcast across the liberated territories, promising that humanity would help every displaced person find their way home, even if it took decades to locate suitable worlds for resettlement. The aftermath revealed the true scale of devourer crimes against intelligent life. Entire galactic civilizations had been erased from history with only their trapped consciousness surviving inside the collective memory. The liberation had brought back cultures that were thought to be myths. Ambassador Yoon Surin was appointed to lead the new Galactic Refugee Council that would coordinate the massive resettlement effort. Many of the freed species possessed technology and knowledge that was far more advanced than human science, but they were grateful for any assistance. The cost of the war was measured not just in human casualties, but in the lives that could not be saved. Captain Yu Jongmin became a hero remembered across dozens of worlds as the man who sacrificed everything to free billions of trapped minds from eternal imprisonment. Memorial services were held throughout human space honoring the soldiers who had died fighting for strangers they never met. The war had cost humanity thousands of lives, but had saved civilizations that represented millions of years of cultural and scientific development. When the Galactic Council formally recognized the Human Federation as a major power, it was not because of their military strength or technological advancement, it was because of what they had done when asked for help by desperate strangers facing extinction. The phrase that had started everything became the foundation of human diplomacy throughout the galaxy. When they pleaded for help, humanity answered. This simple concept guided human foreign policy as they became known as the species that would travel any distance and fight any enemy to protect innocent life. Trade agreements and alliance treaties were secondary to the reputation humans had earned as protectors of those who could not protect themselves. Civilizations throughout the galaxy knew that calling for human assistance meant help would come regardless of the odds or distance involved. The war against the Devourers had changed humanity from a minor species exploring the edges of known space into the recognized guardians of galactic peace. The price of that transformation was measured in human lives, but the reward was the survival of countless innocent civilizations. Years later, when historians studied the conflict, they noted that humanity had gained something more valuable than territory or technology. They had gained the trust and friendship of species across the galaxy, who would never forget that humans had answered their cry for help. The legacy of the Devourer. War became the defining characteristic of human civilization in space, not their weapons or ships or scientific achievements, but their willingness to sacrifice everything to save strangers who had asked for help. The galaxy was safer because humans refused to ignore the pleas of those in need. Chat controls Sonnet 4.